Okay, it's going to do some problem solving on 6.11. 6.11 and 6.10 are the same type problem. They're just now going to put it in words. So I thought I would do some of those. There's another video that has four on it, so let's just start with one. On a map, two cities are 1 inch apart. So we could draw a picture of what that looked like. Let's say here's city A, here's city B, and this, if I measured it, it'd be 1 inch. How far apart are the two cities if the scale, so now they're going to tell me the scale, see how it's just like what we were doing earlier, it's just that we don't have to measure, they're actually telling us how it measures. If the scale 1/2 inch is equal to 20 miles. Okay, now, on the previous videos, I had you guys change these to decimals to get around the fraction, but I'm going to show you, I'm just going to use fractions from now on out just because you need to be able to do that, and hopefully you've got enough practice on 6.10 that you're getting the ideas of proportions down. If not, you just got to do it. You've got to get the idea down. So I'm going to solve this with a proportion, and I'm going to write the scale as one fraction, and I'm going to actually write what we measured here as another fraction. And I noticed that I'm working in inches and miles over here. When I wrote the scale down, I noticed this. So I'm just going to make a decision. I'm going to just keep it pretty straightforward. I'm going to put my inches on top and my miles on the bottom. So I could say, first let me write my scale fraction down. I'm going to make that purple just so we can kind of follow along with colors here. 1/2 inch on the top of the fraction. It's a half. If you can't read it, it's a half, so you're just going to have to, sometimes with this, you're just going to have to be listening. 1/2 inch is 20 miles. Okay, that was the scale that they gave me. Now, I'm going to write what I measured. They said they measured it and it was 1 inch. Notice inches are on the top of the fraction, so when I measured, I have 1 inch. What is that equal to? But we just decided instead of question marks, we're going to start using an X to represent that because it's easier to think about in some ways than a question mark is. So what I'm going to do to solve this is I'm going to cross multiply. To solve a proportion, it's easiest to cross multiply. You could multiply both sides by 20 and then multiply both sides by X. This is the faster way of doing it, is to cross multiply. 1/2 times X is 1/2 X. Now I'm going to put my equal sign, and now I'm going to multiply the other diagonal. 20 times 1 is 20. So basically, if I want to know my answer, which is X, all I got to do is solve this little equation. Now, 1/2 X equals 20. Usually when we have a half and when we have a number and an X next to each other, that means they're multiplied, and these are multiplied. And we usually say the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we would divide both sides by half. But that's ugly. Nobody likes doing it, so we don't do it that way. So let me get rid of it. Because we're not going to do that. We're going to work smart here, okay? So how am I going to get rid of that 1/2? If I have a fraction in front of a variable, the way to get it to disappear is to multiply by its reciprocal, to flip it over and multiply. Okay? And if you look why we do that, 2 goes into 2 one time, 2 goes into 2 one times. Now I have 1 over 1x, which is just x. X is by itself, which means I'm going to have my answer really handy here. All right? So 20 over 1 times 2 over 1. 20 times 2 on top of the fraction is 40. 1 times 1 on the bottom is 1, and 40 over 1 is equal to 40. So my distance is 40 miles. That's my answer. Number 3 says find the distance between two cities. So again, I'll just call this city A and this city B. If the map uses the scale, 1/4 inch is equal to 25 miles. And the cities are 1.5 inches apart on the map. So I measured it, it's 1.5 inches. Do you see that this is just like what we were doing in 610? They're just writing it out a little differently. All right, so we're going to use proportions to solve it. I noticed that I have inches and miles, so I'm going to make fractions with inches on the top and the miles that go with the inches on the bottom. And if you remember, we always make a fraction out of the scale, and we make a fraction out of what we measured. So if I'm making a fraction out of the scale, I'll do that in green over here. 1/4 inch, and again, I'm going to use fractions now, is equal to 25 miles. And when I measured, I got 1.5 inches. And what I want to know is how many miles is 1.5 inches. Because that's how many miles it would be between the two cities. Now, when we work in math, we never use these mixed numbers like 1.5 there. Because they're not handy. It's just not easy to work with them. So if you remember, you could say 2 times 1 is 2 plus 1 is 3/2. So what I'm going to do is scribble that out and put 3/2 instead. That's going to make it easier for me to do the math. We can't do math multiplying with those mixed fractions, so we don't really use them. After you get out of elementary school, you don't hardly ever use those anymore. All right, so if I'm going to solve, I'm going to cross multiply. Anytime I see a fraction equal fraction, I'm going to cross multiply. A fourth times x is a fourth x. And then let me put equal, and I'm going to cross multiply the others, 25 times 3/2. Okay, I know if I'm going to multiply those for reals, I got to put 25 over 1. So I have 1/4 x equal, on the top, 25 times 3 is 75. On the bottom, 1 times 2 is 2. All right, I want x by itself, but it's multiplied by a fraction, and dividing by a fraction is messy, messy, messy. So remember what we did before, is that we said we're going to multiply both sides times the reciprocal, 4 over 1. 4 over 1. The 4's cancel out, leaving me 1 over 1. When I multiply, 1 times 1 is 1 on top, 1 times 1 is 1 on the bottom, 1 over 1 is 1x, and 1x is just equal to x. Let me write my answer in black so it sticks out a little bit better. Now, if I look at this, I can go ahead and multiply. It would make my life easier if I reduce some things. I'm going to reduce. I'm going to say 2 goes into 2 one time, then 2 goes into 4 2 times. So on the top, I now have 75 times 2, and that's 150. And on the bottom, I have 1 times 1 is 1. 150 over 1 is 150. Oh, that's 150 miles there that we were talking about. Still on 6.11. Now I'm going to look at number 6. I've just picked it because I saw a lot of fractions in it, and most of the time people are just having a harder time with that. So we have the scale is 1/8 inch equal 50 miles. And they tell us how many miles apart are two cities that are 6.5 inches apart. So they measured and it was 6.5 inches. So I know that I want to know how far apart they are. That would be so many miles, wouldn't it? That's going to be my thing I'm trying to find, is the number of miles. So just like on the other ones, I'm going to make a fraction, and since we had inches to miles, I'm going to make fractions and put inches on top and miles on the bottom. And if I look at this, and then I'm going to make one fraction with the scale, and I'm going to make another fraction with what I measured. Okay, so the scale, I'll circle it in green. 1/8 of an inch is equal to 50 miles, so there's that fraction. I'm going to put an equal sign, and then I'm going to make another fraction with what we measured. We measured 6.5 inches, and inches goes on top. Now, so that I don't have to make it so messy this time, what is 6.5 inches? I know I can't work with it and multiply it that way, so we could say, well, let's change it to an improper fraction. We use improper fractions in algebra. 2 times 6 is 12, and one more makes 13 over 2. So 13 over 2 goes on top, and I'm looking for the number of miles. That's the unknown, so it goes on the bottom. These fractions look ugly, but we're not even going to have to mess with them as complex fractions. So even though they look ugly, it's not really too big of a deal here because I'm going to cross multiply to solve this. 1/8 times x is 1/8 x. Then I'm going to put my equal sign, and then I'll use blue here. 50 times 13 over 2. Let me write it down. And since 13 over 2 is a fraction, let me make 50 a fraction by sticking it over 1. As long as we're looking at that side of the equation, you could say, oh, let's reduce, because there's a 50 on top and a 2 on the bottom. 2 goes into 2 one time, and 2 goes into 50 25 times. So now I have 1/8 times x is equal to 25 times 13. Come over here and do that. That's 75, 0, 5, 2, 5, Oh, that's 325 over 1, which is just 325. So I have 1/8 x equal 325. I could take the 1 off if I wanted to. I'm about out of room, so I'm going to leave it. Now I want to get x by itself. X is multiplied by an eighth. If I want to get rid of a fraction, I can multiply by the reciprocal of the fraction on both sides. So the eighths cancel out, and I have 1 over 1x, which is just x, equal 325 times 8. So let's see, 325 times 8, 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 2 is 16, and 4 makes 20. 8 times 3 is 24, and 2 make 26, so my answer is 2,600 miles. Okay?